Hi there. I'd like to welcome you to the afternoon adventures at the Mooresville Public Library. I'm Bruce Stedman, a NASA Solar System ambassador living here in the town of Mooresville. Today, I'll be showing just some of the information about myths and legends of the moon believed by people that lived in the distant past. There are many more adventures and discoveries that await you at the Mooresville Public Library. A myth is something that happens that you don't understand and remember is not true, but you can accept it as true. Examples of many natural events were not understood, so stories were made up, like the Norse god Thor creating thunder and lightning during a storm, or the Greek god Poseidon having the seas sink ships. Poseidon was also responsible for floods and even earthquakes. Now, a legend is a possible historical event, but it's not proven to be true, and very often it can be exaggerated. Then there is the legend of King Arthur. Was he a real person? Did he really pull a sword out of a stone? And some stories could be both myth and legend alike. Was there really a Robin Hood? Did this person really steal from the rich and give to the poor? Can you imagine if we still believed in mythology today? So, how do you explain things like why is the sky blue? Where does the sun go? Why is it dark at night? And even why is the moon red? Well, before we even look at myths and legends of the moon, let's take a look at a few real things in space and some stuff about the moon. A good example would be looking at, well, this is a binary star called AB and. Strange name and something really weird that we could make all kinds of fun stories up about. To something like this strange looking thing in space called the Clown Face Nebula. Well, it's nothing more than gas and dust coming from a very old star ending its time. And even the motion of the Earth that was not understood in the distant past to now the moon. We have our constant companion, the moon. It's been traveling around the Earth for over 4 billion years. We always see the same side as it rotates exactly once as it goes around the Earth every 27.3 days. It does take about 29 and a half days to go from full moon to full moon because it has to catch up with the Earth as the Earth is traveling around the sun. This image shows the moon phases between June and July of this year. And you can see all of the information as it's moving very quickly on the lower right-hand side. And this also shows the Apollo landings and many of the craters located on the moon. In just a few seconds, we'll be traveling to the moon. This is like the astronauts did on the Apollo missions of the late 1960s through the early 1970s. An interesting item is the fact that all of the Apollo astronauts' star location navigation training took place at the Moorhead Planetarium in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, including the astronauts for the Mercury, Gemini, and Skylab project. The moon has many amazing facts that even some sound like they could be a made-up story. An interesting fact is the moon is moving away from the Earth at about 1.5 inches per year. And over millions of years, this adds up. And As the moon moves away from the Earth, it helps cause the Earth's rotation to slow down. 500 million years ago, the Earth's day was about 21 hours long, not the 24 hours that we have today. And in about 500 million years from now, the day's length will be about 27 hours long. And even the moon is shrinking in size as the interior cools. It's almost 150 feet skinnier than it was hundreds of millions of years ago. In 1546, John Haywood jokingly stated in his stories that the moon was made of green cheese, and some were not sure if true or not. Even NASA had some fun on Fool's Day, which is April 1st of each year, in 2002, when claimed that the moon was made of cheese. Of course, it was a photoshopped image with even a printed expiration date for the cheese on a crater. Many important scientists had, well, let's say, interesting ideas about the moon. One person who was the most important astronomer by the name of William Herschel, the discoverer of Uranus and many other special objects in space, also believed that aliens lived on the moon. He even made regular reports about their construction projects. And now, moving further into the past, hundreds to thousands of years ago, we witness more stories and mythologies start to appear. One was the moon appearing much closer, which we simply call a supermoon today. But it was a concern. Would it crash into the Earth? To a lunar eclipse, which is nothing more than the Earth casting its shadow on the moon. But during the time of mythology, a lunar eclipse was a scary time. But today, it's an exciting event. The only difficult thing about today's lunar eclipse is the time of day of the eclipse, either getting up or being awake to observe it. So in the year 2020, there are 4 lunar eclipses. In Mooresville, we'll see 2 of them, July 4th and 5th from 11 p.m. at night through 2 a.m. in the morning, with the best timing at 12:30 in the morning, and November 29th and 30th from 2:30 a.m. through 6:50 a.m., with the best time to see it at 4:40 a.m. in the morning. The lunar eclipse, showing when the Earth starts casting its shadow on the moon from the lower left to the upper right, where you see a reddish moon simply because of the way the light is traveling through our atmosphere. In many parts of the world, the misunderstood lunar eclipse affected people's daily lives. Their science just didn't understand a lunar eclipse. And what's interesting is that people from completely different areas had concerns or fears. In India, people avoided cooking, drinking, and even eating during a lunar eclipse. And in ancient Mesopotamia, a lunar eclipse meant that there was going to be an attack on the king, and his soldiers would surround him to protect him. To Native American people from California, believing that the moon was wounded or sick during an eclipse and would need healing. But not all news about a lunar eclipse was bad. In parts of Africa, the Togo people believed that the sun and the moon were having a fight, and it was time for feuds amongst villages to stop. In parts of Mexico, Central America, and South America, the large jaguar cat was one to be feared, and the Inca people of Peru believed that a jaguar was attacking and eating the moon during an eclipse. They would go out and yell and scream at the moon and throw their sticks because they were afraid that at the end of the lunar eclipse, the jaguar might come to Earth and eat them. In Mexico, the Maya moon mythology thousands of years ago believed that the leaders, like a king, had ancestors that came from the moon. This is like saying your great 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 grandparents came from the moon. And how to explain how the sun went down and the moon came up was the goddess Zychel, who fought the sun and made it descend into the darkness every night. In Greece, the mythological goddess Artemis was in charge of all things moon. She was the twin sister of the mythological god Apollo. You might remember that NASA called the moon mission Apollo for landing 12 astronauts on the moon between 1969 and 1972. The latest goal for NASA now is the mission called Artemis to land a person on the moon by 2024. One of the Native American myths, which here are many of, tells us that the sun and the moon are a chieftain and his wife, and of course, the stars are their children. Many parts of the world use the moon as a calendar. Early North American people are a good example. The Algonquin people called the January moon the wolf moon, as the wolves would howl at night. Well, generally, the reason for that was they were hungry and it was cold and food was scarce in January. The Lakota people of North and South Dakota called December the shedding horns moon, as well deer would shed their horns about the middle of the month. Food production to the Cherokee people of North Carolina was extremely important. So June was the plants a sprouting moon, and July the corn in tassel moon. And following it further, December, well, the cold month, was called the snow moon. To the Catawba people of South Carolina, June was called the river month moon, and July, because of the storms that arrived, the thunderstorm moon. And following it further, even in December, well, they had a name for it called the storytelling moon. And to many American Native people, August through October represented a harvest moon. The Cherokee and Catawba tribes used the harvest moon as September, and we even celebrate that today. Now, what can we see in the moon? For centuries, the moon was used to tell stories to children. Even science fiction movies. In China, we have the toad and the moon. Hang O found that her husband had discovered the secret to live forever. She found out that he had a magic potion. She drank it and flew out the window to the moon. Shanghai, her husband, was so angry that he turned her into a three-legged toad. Now, can we see her on the moon? Here we have Hango still on the moon. Well, we know it's not true, but it makes for a wonderful child's story. One thing to point out, if you look at the moon with a telescope, it might not appear as what is called right side up or a correct view, but an upside down or mirror view. This view shows the crater Tycho near the bottom with the large spray out, and the crater Copernicus on the right shoulder of the toad Hango. In Peru, there is the story of the fox and the moon. All that Fox could think about was getting to the moon. One day, he decided to make a grass rope that reached the moon. He then had birds fly it to the moon for him so that he could climb there. Well, now he's there, and the birds say they can still see him. Can you? One interesting thing that we see from the small moon image, in order to see his image, we have to flip the moon upside down. So now Tycho is sitting at the top of the moon. We still see the fox in the moon. And if you've been to a planetarium, you might have seen one of the movies they present. It's called Earth, Moon, and Sun. It's an animation using a fox as the narrator traveling from the Earth to the moon into the sun. Many of us have heard the story of Jack and Jill going up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Scandinavia, the countries of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, have their own version of this story. Jack and Jill are going up the hill to fetch a pail of water from a magical well. The water from this well is able to predict the future. Well, one night, while the children were going up the hill, they were seen by the man who carried the moon on his chariot across the sky. He decided to scoop up the children and bring them to the moon, along with their bucket and pole. And the story goes, can you now find the splash from the spilled bucket? Here is the image of Jack and Jill with their bucket on the moon. And in this case, the moon is right side up with the crater Tycho near the bottom and the crater Copernicus and Jill's hair. Now, can we see where the water splashed? Australia has the story of Baloo the moon. During the night, Baloo went to visit the Earth, where two women invited him to go for a ride in their canoe, which he was happy to do. Baloo enjoyed the ride, but being unsteady, he fell into the water. He was very embarrassed. So each month, he remembers the accident and goes from being a full moon to shrinking away to a new moon to gather his courage and become a proud full moon again. This is where the image of the two women in the canoe is supposed to be seen. And in this particular image of the moon, you see again that Tycho is now sitting at the top of the moon, not the bottom, and that the crater Copernicus is now somewhat nearish the center of the oval. To the Aztec society in Mexico, rabbits represented fertility, agriculture, and were smart to survive. The story of how the sun and the moon began in the sky is a story of their mythological gods. One lit himself on fire, jumped into the sky, and became the sun. A second mythological god decided to do the same. Then a third mythological god that didn't like what he saw, so he threw a rabbit into the second sun's face to dim the light, causing that sun to turn into the moon. It's easy to spot the rabbit outline on the moon. Notice that crater Tycho is moved a bit to the right side. We've also seen many images being created on the moon. The dark spots that help show these images are areas of ancient volcanic eruption called Maria, which is Latin for seas, as early astronomers really thought they were looking at bodies of water called seas. Polynesia is a group of about 1,000 islands in the central and southern part of the Pacific Ocean. They had their own version of a woman living on the moon. The story goes like this. She found a rainbow called a moonbow at night while on her way to get water. She decided to walk on the moonbow until she reached the moon to fulfill her dream of living in the heavens. Moonbows are unusual, but they can be seen like rainbows if water droplets remain in the air with bright moonlight passing through. And if you look at the circled area on the moon, you can just make out where the Polynesian woman is resting after her long walk. In New Zealand, the moon woman is called Moon Rona. One night, as she carried a container of water, the moon went behind a cloud. She tripped on the root of a tree and yelled at the moon. The angry moon didn't like that, swooped down, picked her up along with her water container and the tree she tripped on, and carried them off. If you look at the moon with the crater Tycho at the top, you might be able to see Moon Rona, her container of water, and the tree. Now it's time to see if you can create a special moon story making a shape. And it can be anything. It could be a person, it could be an object, it could even be an animal. Because you never know what you'll find on the moon for an amazing story. Thank you for joining me today with a view of some moon mythology.